They say the highway at night can play tricks on you. The endless stretch of blacktop, the flickering neon signs, the hum of an old truck's engine as it rumbles past, it can make you see things that aren't there. Or worse, make you miss the things that are. I know this better than most. My name is Evelyn Halloway, and I own a little diner called Evelyn Stop. It's nothing fancy, just a squat building with a peeling red and white sign, a row of scratched-up booths, and a humming jukebox that seems to play songs no one remembers choosing. The coffee's always hot, the pie's always fresh, and the door never locks. That's how my father left it before he disappeared, and that's how I've kept it ever since. They say it's the last stop for miles, but funny thing is, I don't remember ever seeing a map that proves it. Tonight is slow, just like most nights. Outside, the wind howls across the highway, kicking up dust. The only car on the lot belongs to a trucker nursing his third cup of coffee, staring into it like the answer to his problems might float to the surface. The jukebox hums a low, static-filled tune, the kind that scratches at the back of your brain like you've heard it before, but you don't know where. And then the bell above the door jingles. I look up from wiping the counter as a man stumbles in, breathing hard, eyes wide as if he's seen a ghost. He's tall, rough around the edges, wearing a faded denim jacket that looks like it's been through hell and back. He doesn't take a seat right away, just stands there in the doorway, shoulders rising and falling, like he's trying to convince himself this place is real. I don't rush him. Folks who come in like this need a moment. After a long beat, he walks over and drops onto the nearest stool. "Coffee," he mutters, rubbing his hands together like they're shaking too much to hold the cup. I pour him a fresh one, watching as he grips it tight. The trucker in the corner glances up, but doesn't say a word. We all know when someone's got a story they don't want to tell just yet. "You okay?" I ask, keeping my voice even. He laughs under his breath, but there's no humor in it. No, I don't think I am." I slide the sugar closer to him, waiting. People spill their guts in diners like this all the time. It's something about the hum of the fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt toast and old coffee. It makes them talk. And sure enough, after a long sip, he does. "I picked up a hitchhiker," he says, staring into his cup. "About an hour back, just before the state line." I lean on the counter. "Yeah." He nods slowly. Looked normal. Real quiet. Didn't say much. I asked where he was headed, and he just said here. Something in my stomach tightens. "Here." I repeat. The man nods again. "Yeah." Said he was coming to see someone. He exhales, rubbing his temple. I didn't think much of it. Figured he was just another drifter, you know? But then I glanced in the rear view. He stops, his fingers tightening around the cup like it's the only thing keeping him steady. "There was no one there," he whispers. The trucker shifts in his seat, but neither of us say anything. I pulled over, checked the back seat, checked the road behind me, but he was just gone. He finally looks up at me, and his face is pale, his eyes searching. Tell me that's normal. Tell me I'm just tired and seeing things. I don't tell him anything, because I can feel it now, that creeping cold that slips under the door when something isn't right. The bell jingles again. I don't want to look. I really don't. But my head turns on its own, like something else is moving it for me. And there, sitting in the last booth by the window, is a man I swear wasn't there a second ago. His face is shadowed, his hands resting neatly on the table. He doesn't have a menu, doesn't have a drink, just sits there, watching. My mouth goes dry, because I know that face. It's the same one I've seen in the old photographs my father left behind. The same one I haven't seen in over 15 years. The same one that disappeared the night my father did. I woke up to the sound of the front doorbell jingling. Not from someone coming in, but from the wind rattling against the glass. The diner was empty, except for the smell of stale coffee and last night's fried bacon. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the counter where Jimmy Barnes had been sitting just hours ago. His coffee cup was still there, a ring of condensation around the base. The spoon he had used to stir his sugar lay on the saucer, untouched. But Jimmy was gone. I walked outside, my boots crunching against the gravel. His truck was still parked where he left it, engine off but the door slightly open. That wasn't like him. Truckers don't just leave their rigs unlocked, let alone walk away from them in the middle of nowhere. The wind howled through the empty lot as I peeked inside the truck. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the passenger seat. It looked like he had left in a hurry. I checked around the back of the diner, calling his name. Nothing. Just the endless stretch of highway, disappearing into the horizon. A feeling crawled up my spine, slow and cold. People didn't just disappear like this. Not unless something took them. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that maybe Jimmy had wandered off to take a leak and just never came back. But I'd lived out here long enough to know when something wasn't right. Back inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to shake the unease settling in my gut. The passenger sat in his usual booth, hands folded on the table, watching me. "You're looking for him," he said. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, waiting. He tapped his fingers on the table, slow and steady, like a ticking clock. "You won't find him." My throat went dry. "You know where he went." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was never meant to leave. A sharp chill ran through me, despite the heat from the griddle behind the counter. "You keep talking in riddles," I said. "Either say what you mean, or shut up." The passenger chuckled, a low, quiet sound. "You're getting close, Evelyn. Closer than most." "Closer to what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the sugar dispenser and poured a small heap onto the table. Then, with one long finger, he drew a line straight through it. "Some roads don't lead where you think they do," he murmured. Before I could press him further, the door opened, and a waitress from a town over, Lydia, stepped inside. She looked pale, her eyes darting around the diner like she expected something to jump out at her. "Evie," she said, breathless. "Your diner." She hesitated. "It doesn't show up on maps anymore." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her apron pocket, a printed road map. She smoothed it out on the counter, jabbing a finger at the stretch of highway where Evelyn's stop should have been. Nothing. Just empty road. Like the diner had never been there at all. The wind howled outside, and I felt it then, a shift in the air. Like the world had just moved an inch to the left, and I was the only one who noticed. The passenger watched me from his booth, his smile slow and knowing. "Still think you're the one running this place?" he asked. I didn't answer, because, for the first time, I wasn't sure I was. I don't sleep much these days. It's not the late nights or the endless cups of coffee that keep me awake. It's the silence. The kind of silence that feels too heavy, like it's pressing down on you, waiting for you to notice something you'd rather not. Tonight, that silence is thick. The diner is empty except for the hum of the neon sign outside and the occasional creak of the old pipes behind the counter. I wipe down the counter for the third time, even though it doesn't need it. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to stop me from thinking about Jimmy Barnes. He was here last night. I poured him coffee. I watched his hands shake as he told me about the hitchhiker that vanished from his truck. I saw him leave. His truck is still out there. Engine cold. Door wide open. Like he stepped out for a breath of air and never came back. I tell myself I should call someone. The cops, maybe. But what would I even say? That a man disappeared into thin air? That this isn't the first time it's happened? I already know what would happen. They'd come out here, scratch their heads, take a few notes, and leave. Just like the last time. Just like every time. I grab the coffee pot and pour myself a fresh cup, ignoring the way my hands tremble. The passenger sits in his usual booth, watching. He's been here since before sunset. Never ordered. Never left. He doesn't speak unless he wants to. And tonight, he is quiet. I don't like it when he's quiet. The bell above the door jingles, making me jump. I turn too fast, nearly spilling my coffee. A man steps inside, shaking off the night air. I recognize him. Frank Holloway. Local guy, retired trucker. Comes by every few weeks. Always orders black coffee and a slice of pie. He slides into a stool at the counter, nodding and greeting. "Coffee?" I ask, already reaching for the pot. "Please," he says, rubbing his hands together. "Damn cold out tonight." I pour his cup and set it in front of him. He takes a slow sip, then sighs like it's the best thing he's had all day. "You all right, Evie?" he asks, giving me a sideways glance. "Look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a dry laugh. Wouldn't be the first time. Frank chuckles, but there's something in his eyes, something thoughtful. He stirs his coffee, even though he drinks it black. I know that look. He's got something to say. "You ever hear from your old man?" he asks finally. I freeze. The diner feels smaller all of a sudden, like the walls are inching closer. I put down the coffee pot before I drop it. "Why are you asking?" Frank hesitates, then leans in, lowers his voice. "I swear to God, Evie, I saw him last week." My stomach twists. "That's not funny, Frank," I say, but my voice is too tight. "I'm not joking," he says, shaking his head. I was driving down Route 16, near the old gas station. It was late, maybe past midnight, and there he was, walking along the shoulder, clear as day. Same old jacket, same walk. I stare at him, waiting for him to grin, to tell me he's messing with me. But he doesn't. My father has been gone for 15 years. People don't just show up after 15 years. You sure it was him? I ask. Frank nods. I even pulled over, rolled down my window, called his name. He stopped, looked right at me. He swallows hard. Then he kept walking, like he didn't even recognize me. My pulse pounds in my ears. Frank shifts in his seat, suddenly uneasy. Something ain't right around here, Evie. He looks around, then leans in again. You ever notice how folks come through here and don't come back? I glance at the passenger's booth. He's watching us. I lower my voice. Yeah, I've noticed. Frank nods like he expected that answer. He downs the rest of his coffee in one gulp and reaches for his wallet. You ever want to talk? You know where to find me. He drops a 5 on the counter and gets up to leave. I should stop him, ask him more. But my mind is too full, buzzing with questions I don't want answers to. The bell jingles as the door swings open. Cold air rushes in. Frank steps out into the night. I watch through the window as he walks to his car. He fumbles with his keys, glancing over his shoulder, like he feels something watching him. I blink. For a second, just a second, I think I see a figure standing by the road. Tall, still, watching. Then Frank gets into his car, and the headlights cut through the darkness. He drives away. I let out a shaky breath and turn back to the counter. The passenger is still watching me. Don't look so worried, he says, voice smooth and calm. Some people come back. Some don't. I stare at him, my fingers curl into fists. What do you know about my father? He smiles, slow and knowing. You'll find out soon enough, he says. My blood runs cold. Outside, Frank's car should be taillights in the distance by now. But when I glance out the window, there's nothing. Just the empty highway stretching into the dark. The diner was quieter than usual that night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the uneasy kind, the kind that makes you check over your shoulder even when you know no one's there. The clock above the register ticked in a steady rhythm, but something about the sound felt wrong, like it was slowing down. Or maybe I was imagining it. Only one customer remained. The passenger sat in his usual spot, the last booth by the window. He never ate, never drank. Just sat there, always at the same time, like he had nowhere else to be. I'd gotten used to ignoring him. Until now. You're restless tonight, he said. His voice was smooth but had an edge to it, like the sound of a blade being sharpened. I stopped wiping the counter. He had never spoken to me before. I turned slowly. His eyes were already on me, dark and unreadable. You know my name, I said, more of a statement than a question. He smiled. It wasn't friendly. Of course I do, Evelyn. My stomach tightened. No one ever called me Evelyn. Just Evie. I crossed my arms, masking the unease creeping on my spine. So what? You finally decided to order something. His smile didn't change, but his fingers tapped lightly against the table, like he was thinking about something. This place isn't real in the way you think it is, he said. You've noticed it, haven't you? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Notice what? He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The missing people, the stories that don't make sense, the way this diner seems separate, outside of everything else. I gripped the rag in my hand tighter. If you've got something to say, say it. The passenger leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Evelyn, when was the last time you left this diner? I opened my mouth, ready to answer. But I hesitated. The question hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I tried to think back to the last time I locked up and drove into town, the last time I went grocery shopping, the last time I did something as normal as standing outside in the daylight. But the memories weren't there. I swallowed hard. You're lying, I said, but my voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. He studied me, like he was waiting for me to put the pieces together on my own. You've been here a long time, he said. Longer than you realize. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I leave all the time, I argued. I go into town. I see people. The words caught in my throat. Did I? I try to picture it. The streets of town. The faces of people I knew. But all I could summon were blurry images, like memories of a dream that faded the moment I woke up. You don't leave, the passenger said, his voice quieter now. Because you can't. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, I whispered. That's not true. But deep down, something inside me knew it was. I felt dizzy, like the floor beneath me had shifted. I gripped the edge of the counter, grounding myself. You're messing with me, I said. This is some kind of trick. The passenger didn't move. Is it? He asked. I glanced at the door. The neon open sign flickered faintly in the window. The highway beyond stretched into darkness, empty and endless. I tried to remember the last time I saw someone pull into the parking lot. The last time someone actually left. And I couldn't. The passenger watched me in silence, letting the truth sink in. Then he smiled again, tilting his head slightly. Would you like to know why? The cold in my chest spread. I didn't answer, but I knew that it didn't matter. I was already listening. I don't know how the key got in my apron pocket. 1 minute. I was wiping down the counter, listening to the rain patter against the diner's windows. The next, I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, jagged shape of metal. My breath hitched as I pulled it out. A small, rusted key, its surface worn smooth like it had been handled 1,000 times before. I turned it over in my palm, my fingers tracing its edges. I had never seen it before, but the weight of it felt familiar, like it had been waiting for me. The passenger was watching. He sat in his usual booth at the far end of the diner, his long fingers resting on the table, his eyes fixed on me. He never ate, never drank, just sat there listening. Tonight, he was smiling. I swallowed hard and shoved the key back into my pocket. Closing time came and went, but I didn't leave. I couldn't. Something about the key pulled at me, an invisible thread tugging me deeper into the diner's bones. The place was silent now, the only sound the hum of the old neon sign outside. I turned off the main lights, leaving the diner bathed in the sickly red glow from the windows. My footsteps echoed as I moved toward the back hallway, past the kitchen and storage rooms. And then I saw it. A door that had never been there before. It stood at the end of the hall, half hidden in shadow. The wood was old, cracked, the paint peeling away in flakes. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I stepped closer. I raised a trembling hand and pressed my palm against the door. It was cold, colder than it should have been. The key in my pocket felt heavier now. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave, to forget I ever saw it. But I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to. With a shaky breath, I pulled out the key and slid it into the lock. The click echoed down the hall like a gunshot. The door swung open. At first, I couldn't see anything. Just darkness, stretching endlessly in front of me. The air that drifted out smelled of dust, and something else, something metallic like old blood. I stepped inside. The light from the hallway barely cut through the dark. The room was small, lined with old metal shelves covered in stacks of yellowed papers. A single wooden chair sat in the center of the room, facing a wall. And on that wall, a mirror. My breath hitched. The glass was cracked down the center, jagged lines splitting my reflection in two. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach twist. It was what I saw behind me. In the mirror's reflection, the diner wasn't right. The counter was covered in dust, the booths torn apart, the neon sign outside flickering like a dying heartbeat. The air looked thick, heavy, like I was staring into a place where time had rotted away. And then I saw something else. A shadow. It stood just behind me in the reflection, its shape tall and wrong, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My mouth went dry. My real reflection stood still, frozen in horror. But in the mirror, the shadow moved closer. A voice, low and smooth, drifted from the doorway behind me. Do you see it now? I turned, heart slamming against my ribs. The passenger stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. But his eyes held something deeper, something ancient. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. What is this place? I whispered. He didn't answer. He just smiled. I stood there, staring at the mirror, my hand frozen inches from the cold surface. My reflection wasn't the same as it had been just moments before. The diner was ruined. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. The chairs were toppled, the booths torn up, the counter covered in dust. The lights flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. But what unsettled me the most wasn't the broken-down diner. It was the figure standing behind me. I turned quickly, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The air felt colder, heavier, like something was pressing down on me. My breath caught in my throat. The passenger was watching me, his face unreadable, eyes darker than I'd ever seen before. "Do you see it now?" he asked, his voice softer than before, like he was speaking from somewhere distant. It was as if the words were wrapped in something thick, something that made the air around us feel even thicker. I couldn't bring myself to answer right away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I'd lived here all my life, this diner, this exact place, and yet, it wasn't real. Not in the way I believed it was. The silence stretched between us, like something waiting to snap. Finally, I managed to speak, though my voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. "What is this place? Why is it like this?" The passenger didn't move, but he didn't need to. I could feel his presence, like it was part of the air I breathed. "Evelyn's Stop isn't just a diner," he said, slowly, the words like the weight of a door creaking open. "It exists between realities. It draws in those who are lost in one way or another." I shook my head, confusion clouding my thoughts. "Lost?" I whispered, though the word felt too heavy. "What do you mean?" "I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently, his voice like the sound of wind through dry leaves. "You're lost, just like your father was." A chill ran down my spine at the mention of him. My father, the man who had disappeared so many years ago. I thought I had come to terms with the idea that he had simply vanished, gone forever. But this was something else entirely. What happened to him? I asked, feeling the weight of the question press against my chest. The passenger didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the counter, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the tile floor. He gestured toward the door behind the counter, the door I had never noticed before, the one I had found the key for. He never left. He said softly, like it was the simplest truth in the world. "Not really." I didn't want to hear it, didn't want to understand. The thought of my father still being here, trapped somehow, was too much. But I couldn't look away. "What are you talking about? Where is he?" "Here," he said, his voice carrying an eerie finality. "Your father never left the diner, Evelyn. He became part of it, just like you will if you stay long enough." He turned to face me then, and I felt a strange pull, like he was drawing me in with his gaze. "This place, it feeds on those who stay too long, those who don't leave when they should." The weight of his words settled into my bones. My father, the missing customers, my life. It was all connected, and not in any way I understood. I glanced back at the mirror, seeing it again, this broken, ruined version of the diner, and I felt a tightness in my chest. "But I'm here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I've been here forever, haven't I?" "Not forever," the passenger replied, though his voice held no comfort. "But long enough. You were never meant to leave, Evelyn. Your father wasn't either." My legs felt weak beneath me. My breath came quicker, as if the very air in the room was thickening. My father had been trapped in this place. And now I was too. There was no leaving. Not really. I looked up at the passenger, the questions tumbling out in a rush. "Why do you do this? Why trap people here?" He didn't answer right away. He only studied me, his dark eyes unreadable, like he was looking past me. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his words deliberate. "I'm not the one who traps them here. The diner does. It calls them in. And when it does, there's only one way out." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I knew I didn't want to ask it, but I had to. I had to know. "What's the way out?" The passenger's lips twisted into a faint, almost sad smile. "You don't want to know. But I did. I had to know. Tell me." His eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw something like pity in his gaze. "The way out is the same for everyone who stays too long, Evelyn," he said, his voice heavy. "You become part of it. You become part of the diner." A cold shiver ran through me. I couldn't process it all. My father, the others, the way out, and me. How was I supposed to handle this? How was I supposed to understand that the place I called home for so long was a trap? "You can leave if you want," the passenger continued, as though reading my thoughts, "but not in the way you think. If you leave, you'll forget. You'll forget everything. Everyone. You won't remember your father. You won't remember this place." I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But something inside me hesitated. Something was holding me here, tying me to this cursed diner. The passenger's eyes softened. But if you stay, Evelyn, you'll never truly leave. You'll become a part of it. Forever. I stepped back, my mind reeling. The door was behind me. The key was in my pocket. But I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Could I leave? Could I forget it all and start over? Or would I become part of the diner, just like my father? The passenger was watching me, waiting. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of choices I wasn't ready to make. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same anymore. I had learned the truth. And now I had to decide whether I would live with it or disappear into the same darkness my father had. I stood there, staring at the mirror, unable to look away. It wasn't the diner I knew. It couldn't be. The reflection in the glass showed a place long abandoned, cobwebs in the corners, broken windows letting in the moonlight like slivers of cold steel. The diner looked dead, old, forgotten. I could feel the weight of the air around me, thick with dust and silence. The place felt empty, but somehow not empty. I could almost hear the low hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, the jukebox playing one of those sad, old songs. But no, there was nothing. The reflection told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't in the diner anymore, not the one I had known my whole life. Do you see it now? The passenger's voice broke through my thoughts, sharp and cold. I didn't need to look at him to know he was there. I could feel his presence, thick and suffocating, like fog rolling in over the highway. I glanced at his reflection instead. He was smiling, of course, his expression that same unsettling calm I had come to expect from him. But his eyes, they were different. They weren't human anymore. There was nothing behind them but emptiness. He tilted his head as if waiting for me to speak, to ask the question I already knew the answer to. Why? I whispered, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. Why is this happening? Why me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence stretch out between us, thick and suffocating, before finally speaking again, his voice slow, deliberate. This place was built for you, Evie. For all of you. It's where lost souls come to rest, to wait. I swallowed hard, a tight knot of fear and confusion tightening in my chest. My father. The other customers who had vanished without a trace. The eerie feeling that had been crawling under my skin for years. It was all connected to this place, to me. I didn't know how, but I felt it deep inside, a certainty I couldn't shake. The diner had become more than just a place. It was a prison. You're just as lost as they are, he said, stepping closer, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the floor. And you always have been. It's just a matter of time before you see the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting the sudden rush of panic that threatened to overtake me. What was the truth? Was I already dead? Was this some twisted version of reality, where the living and the dead didn't quite separate? I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen in place. But the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me from every direction, weighing me down. I opened my eyes and looked at the mirror again. The diner I knew was still there, or at least its reflection was. But everything was wrong, out of place. The key in my pocket. How long had it been there? I hadn't even realized it until now. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I pulled it out. The cold metal felt like it belonged to someone else. Not me. The passenger watched me, his smile never faltering. You know what the key opens, don't you? His voice was gentle, coaxing, like he was talking to a child, or worse, a victim. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to open the door, to see what it led to. But something inside me knew. I knew I had no choice. The door had always been there, hidden, waiting for me to open it. It was my decision now. I turned the key slowly, hearing the faint click of the lock disengaging. The door, the hidden door, swung open in front of me, its creak echoing through the empty diner. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a drum of dread. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The room behind the door was filled with shadows, deep and thick. And, at the far end of it, there was something that looked like a mirror, but it wasn't the same. It was alive, almost. It shimmered with an unnatural light. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I was staring at myself, but not me. A version of me, older, worn down, hollow-eyed. Her face was gaunt, like someone who had been starving for years. And there was something wrong with the way she smiled, as though she knew something I didn't. I stepped back, my chest tightening, panic clawing at my throat. The reflection moved toward me. No, it was me moving, pulling me closer, drawing me in. And then I heard it. A voice. My father's voice. Soft, desperate. Evie. I stumbled back, my hands pressed to my ears. No, it's always been this way, the passenger said, his voice now a low murmur in my ear. You were never meant to leave. I shook my head violently, backing away from the mirror. I know. I won't be like him. I won't end up like him. But there was no escape. The mirror, my father's voice, it pulled me, harder, faster. And then, just before it all consumed me, the choice was clear. I could leave, walk away from everything I knew, forget all of it. But that would mean losing myself, losing the memories, the pain, everything that made me who I was. Or I could stay. The diner, the shadows, the passenger. It all became clearer in that moment. This place wasn't just my prison. It was my fate. I can't. I whispered, staring at the reflection that was me. I can't leave. The passenger smiled, and it was like the air in the room suddenly grew colder, darker. Then you've made your choice, Evie. Welcome to the rest of your life. And just like that, everything went black. I sit alone in the dim glow of the diner, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional scrape of a trucker's boots on the tile, the only sounds. The jukebox, once full of life, now just emits the occasional crackle between songs no one remembers. The night outside is thick with fog, rolling across the highway like a thick veil. It feels like I've always been here, like there's never been a world outside the diner, just this quiet, unbroken stretch of road. The man who just walked in doesn't notice me. He's still trying to shake the dust off his jacket, his eyes wide as if he's been traveling for days. He's thin, pale even, and his face, tired and worn, shows signs of someone running from something. I know that look. We all do. His footsteps echo in the empty space as he approaches the counter. He glances over at me, and for a second, his eyes meet mine. I don't know how to describe it, but I feel something in that look. Recognition. A flicker of confusion. I know what he's thinking. He orders the usual, coffee, black, with no sugar, and I serve it to him, my hands moving on their own. The old mugs still feel warm to the touch, the chipped edges familiar, even after all these years. I can't help but watch him as he stirs his coffee. His hand shakes slightly, like he's afraid of something, like he's already seen too much of this world, or of the one just beyond it. I've seen them all come through the door. The ones who are lost, the ones running, the ones looking for something they can never find. There's no way of knowing who will stay, who will leave, and who will never be seen again. He looks up at me again, his eyes narrowing as if something's wrong, as if he's about to ask a question. But he doesn't. Instead, he just looks down at the coffee, his brow furrowing. I've been driving for hours, he mutters under his breath, as if to no one. Thought I'd never find a place. This road's strange. It's always strange for them. I don't say anything. There's nothing left to say. The door opens again. Another customer, an older woman this time. She steps inside, glancing around, her footsteps light as she makes her way to the booth by the window. I feel her eyes on me, but she says nothing. She doesn't need to. She already knows what this place is. I can't bring myself to say anything more to the man at the counter. There's nothing left to tell him. I've made my choice, and now I have to live with it. The diner, this stretch of highway, these endless nights, they're all I have now. All I'll ever have. I know what happens to the others. I know what happens to anyone who stays too long. He's looking at me again, his eyes searching. I don't think he knows what he's searching for, but I do, and I've known all along. I stand there for a moment, feeling the weight of the years in my bones. The silence is thick now, almost suffocating. I wonder, as I feel the passage of time around me, if anyone really leaves this place. Maybe it's not just the travelers who stay. Maybe it's the diner itself. Maybe it's me. I glance out the window, watching the fog roll in heavier, swallowing the highway whole. The world outside seems so far away now. It always does. And then I hear it. The hum of the jukebox, the song starting again. But this time, it feels different. It's a song I don't remember picking. It's slow, haunting, and it fills the space between us. I turn back to the man at the counter. His hand is trembling as he lifts his coffee cup to his lips. He doesn't notice how the diner seems to breathe with every passing second, how the lights flicker and buzz just slightly louder like they're alive. He doesn't notice how the air feels thicker now, like it's wrapping itself around him, drawing him in. The door opens again, just a crack, and I glance back. A shadow moves in the hallway, but no one steps inside. For a moment, I wonder if I've seen something that isn't real, but I know better. The man looks up, his gaze locking with mine, and in that moment I see it. I see me, the man I was, the passenger who sat in this very seat years ago, uncertain, frightened. I see the same hesitation, the same fear in his eyes. It's the same look I gave Adina the first time I sat in that booth, wondering if I would ever leave. But I didn't leave, did I? The clock on the wall ticks louder now, its hands moving forward, but somehow I feel like I've already gone back in time. The fog outside thickens. The diner hums like it's waiting. The jukebox continues to play. And then I see it, too clearly for my comfort. The door behind the counter is now open. I feel the pull of the place. The pull to stay, to become part of it, just like the others before me. And I know, without a doubt, that the cycle has begun again. The man at the counter finishes his coffee, sets the cup down, and stands. He looks at me one last time, his face almost too familiar, his eyes filled with a knowing dread. He walks to the door, and, as he steps into the night, I feel that same cold draft pass through the diner, just like it did for me, for all the others. And, as the bell above the door rings softly behind him, I realize I am no longer just Evie. I am a new passenger. The cycle continues.